called speculative fiction. It's usually characterized by really dark, really fantastic elements. It's also like has different interpretations of things, like we were talking about vampires earlier. Well, instead of it just being a vampire that sucks blood, perhaps it's like a psychic vampire and it sucks your mind or something like that. They take what are normally things that we consider to be very common in mythology, and then they twist it around or make it different in some way, and that would be weird fiction. And especially like aliens and alien monster hybrids, like that kind of stuff, will start to pop into it as well. So yeah, we've got like ghosts or vampires usually show up, but they're in different ways. And the word that a lot of weird fiction authors usually try to use is numinous. They like the word numinous. It means something that creates a sense of awe and also a sense of fear. So they're trying to go for both at the same time. Numinous. According to Lovecraft, the greatest Gothic horror author is really the front runner of weird fiction, and that is Edgar Allan Poe. He thinks Poe is the front runner of weird fiction, which I think there's some argument to be had for that, for sure. Yeah. So weird fiction. And one of the original places where you could find weird fiction was a magazine called Weird Tales, that some of you may be familiar with. It's technically still around today, but it's only published like every 4 years or something. It's really odd, because I think they just don't have the money to do it anymore. But this is an original cover. So this is from 1942 when they published The Shadow over Innsmouth. So there's Lovecraft right there. And then of course we've got this great, there you go, your fish people, right? And then over here, so this is a cover actually from the 90s. Oh, it says it there. Winter of 92, 93, that's what it says. Where they had done like a reissue of what was probably the Call of Cthulhu. So that's supposed to be Cthulhu on that front cover right there. So he did publish in Weird Tales a little bit, but again, never made any money off, like not living off of it the way that like, Bradbury or Asimov or whoever would have been. But, okay. So, now we need to talk about some of the themes. So Lovecraft's writing, and he's sort of building some themes. I should say that, when I mentioned that quip about Santa Claus when he was a kid, Lovecraft did identify as an atheist, so kind of makes sense when you look at some of the themes in his work. It's like, yeah, this guy probably, yeah, okay. But the first theme is cosmic indifference. And it just means that the universe is totally indifferent to you. It's indifferent to any intention that you have, any good you want to do. You are completely insignificant in the matters of the universe. I would say that's probably number one. The second one, which has been, I think this has become a lot more popular now, is the unreliable narrator, right? So in most of Lovecraft's work, you have someone who is probably going insane. He's acquired too much knowledge. We'll get down to the knowledge. And is slowly going crazy. Or sometimes you may have someone picking up a story where they think, like, I think that's what goes on at the Mountains of Madness. At the beginning, you have someone who is finding out, oh, this guy went crazy. Why did he go crazy? And they're reading like his diary or his journal, and it's like, this dude's losing it. What's happening? Oh, but he says X, Y, and Z, and and so then they go on this adventure, and then other people go crazy, and it's just nonstop, and it spreads, and just spreads like a virus, right? So you have a deteriorating character who you can't really trust, who seems to be going insane. The mechanical universe, this is very similar to cosmic indifference. The universe operates in its own way, and nothing that you do is going to change that. The universe will just continue to operate the same as it always had. This includes whether or not you live or die, if the universe continues to operate. The next one, so like I mentioned, is forbidden knowledge. There are some things on this earth that are never meant to be known. You should not know them, and too much knowledge can and will drive you insane. So be careful what you wish for.
Or worse.
Or worse. Or worse. Right? Similar to these other ones I talked about, fate, right? It's not possible to change your own fate. The universe will operate however it chooses to. You have no say on your fate. And the protagonist is never in control. In any of Lovecraft's stories, the protagonist is never in control. You have no choice. And then lastly, the non-human influences on humanity. So Lovecraft is going to build this pantheon, these gods that are going to influence the universe. And we're going to talk a little bit about that structure and what that is. And then getting back into what we were just talking about with weird fiction, I would say there's a lot of like alien and monstrous influence on the universe and on humanity that in many ways humans don't know what's going on. Like they don't know that that's what's happening. Any questions so far?
So, monsters or gods can influence the universe, but not man.
Apparently so. Yeah, yeah. He felt like humanity just was. So, and I think this is part of the thing, though. Humanity is kind of like the pawns on the chessboard, right? So the gods and the aliens are like the ones actually directing you, right?
Is that, so for someone who has not read Lovecraft, is the entire body of his work fall into this universe where these celestial beings exist, or is
Yeah.
there stuff where it's to a lesser degree or even not?
Yes. So the answer to that is yes. Especially some of his early imitation stories, I don't really think belong in that universe because he hadn't built it yet. So, like for example, Herbert West Reanimator, I don't really think is a part of like the Cthulhu mythos because there's no mention of it, right? Or maybe like the Terrible Old Man, like that story has no influence on anything. It's totally separate in that regard. So the Cthulhu mythos, same as like a lot of authors, the more he's writing about it, the more he's building and adding rules. He's adding like governance to the universe. So his early stories, I would say, are not really tied into that as much. But that being said, like he also wrote, so the Color Out of Space is one of my favorite stories, and it's really a sci-fi horror story. It really doesn't have much of anything to do with the Cthulhu mythos. It was just he wanted to write a sci-fi horror. He hadn't done it. He hadn't done a sci-fi story. So he was like, oh, I'm going to do a sci-fi story. You know, see, it's not all tied into that, but the more he writes about it, the more it's going to start seeping in. Great question. Any other questions? So we're going to talk about sort of the pantheon and the Cthulhu mythos and sort of what he built and how he kind of created it, this very depressed man. And this is a sketch of Cthulhu that Lovecraft did in 1934. I don't know if anybody recognizes what this is. In fact, it's not just Cthulhu. You may know what it is.
Isn't that the Strange Eons passage when Death May Die, that one? Or no?
Oh, not that.
Okay.
But so it looks to be. He looks like he's sitting on a chair or something, right? Like he's sitting. It's actually like the idol from the story from At the Mountains of Madness and like the Call of Cthulhu. They find this weird idol buried in like the Antarctic, and I think it's found in a few places in the mythos in general. But they find this idol, and it's like, what is this thing? And do people worship it? What is it? And so they're trying to figure out what culture it came from and like where it's from. But so that's his drawing of that thing from the story. But that is Cthulhu. I mean, that's obviously Cthulhu, right? Yeah. It's also mentioned in Dagon. If you've ever read Dagon, it's Dagon. That's another one of his Cthulhu mythos stories.
What does the writing say?
To R.H. Barlow, Esquire, whose sculpture hath given
Personality?
Accountability, personality to this trivial something of his something of the something.
Mysterious.
And then he signed it down there, and then that just says Cthulhu. and
Who's
that's
R.H.
from-
Barlow, anybody?
That I don't know. I'm
Those
probably
are
from,
from the club, maybe?
maybe from the club, could be Caleb Club. Yeah. I should have had to Google
Just
that.
wondered, sorry.
No, that's a great question. I don't know why I didn't think to look that up before I put it on here. Jeez. But yeah, and there's some kind of mysterious writing on the side of it, which is also what they find in the story. Okay. So when we're talking about the pantheon, we need to talk about the setting. That's probably, the setting is key. So let's get the setting out of the way first, because this is kind of still world building, right? He's world building because this is all fictitious. Most of the stories all take place in these same locations. Arkham. Arkham is a fictitious city in Massachusetts. It is the home of Miskatonic University. That is another major location in the stories. Arkham is probably situated around a couple other towns called Innsmouth and Dunwich, which are, again, more places where these stories take place. And I have a map I'm going to show you guys here in just a second. This area of New England, a few scholars have looked at, and they believe it's actually in or around Essex County, and it's referred to as Lovecraft country now, which I think is kind of cool. Most of the main characters of the stories tend to live or work around Arkham, Miskatonic University, Innsmouth, or Dunwich. They seem to have some kind of affiliation with one of these little cities or towns. Miskatonic itself is a key location for studying these monsters, and like there's like a lot of stuff tied into that, and also creatures that are revealed, especially during the Dunwich horror. That's like one of my favorite short stories that he wrote. Miskatonic plays a huge part of that. And then yours was The Shadow over Innsmouth. That's another one. So all of our main characters tend to be in this-ish part of New England. Okay, so again, he's staying New England centric because that's what he's comfortable with. He likes all of the history there. And in a lot of ways, I think this kind of ties in very nicely for him, because if he's interested in witchcraft and he's trying to say that, like, oh, some of this, he's like world building, right? It's like, well, maybe the witchcraft thing was related to his universe, right? You can kind of tie that in and make it a little bit stronger, make it more defined. But yeah, and so there's some kind of like river up here, I don't know, the Miskatonic, right? But then here's Cambridge and Boston. And yeah, Boston is, I think, mentioned a few different times, so that's how they kind of were able to figure out that all these things were relatively in the same location. So our main characters are all hanging out in this part of the country, for the most part. They're all there. But what about those who are out there? That's the Cthulhu mythos. These are our gods. So we've established where our people live, who they are, but now we need to figure out who are the gods. Who are the gods and what do they do? So in the Cthulhu mythos, the first group of gods that we're going to talk about are the great old ones. And Lovecraft will often sort of pepper in like references to the great old ones, but he doesn't explicitly talk about them. It's just kind of referenced at the beginning. So these are malignant gods, bad gods. It seems like all of them are malignant. They all live on Earth in hidden locations. So we're still on the Earth, technically. And so that would be gods such as Azathoth, Nyarlathotep, and then Cthulhu is the big one, of course. There's sea monster god, Dagon, and Yog-Sothoth. So all of these gods, and I know you're looking at all these names like, oh boy, but they're all supposedly hidden on Earth somewhere. So they've had some kind of interaction with humans. Maybe we don't know where they are anymore. And these gods actually established certain populations on the Earth. So Dagon and Mother Hydra are two of them, and they established the Deep Ones, which are an ocean-dwelling race of beings that are featured in The Shadow over Innsmouth. And Cthulhu is by far like the most well-known. Everybody seems to know Cthulhu. And he resides in the ocean, and this is a famous quote, and it says, in his house at Merlier, dead Cthulhu waits dreaming. And this is something from the story. So these, the great old ones, all live upon the Earth. At some point in time, they ruled the Earth and ruled certain populations of people. Some of them had their own populations, like the Deep Ones, and were worshipped by humans, but disappeared for some unknown reason. And now they reside in secret. So that's why Cthulhu is down there. Dead Cthulhu waits dreaming. So, okay, so these are our great old ones. And I think this is really cool because someone tried to do like a Kickstarter to get idols made of all of these, which I feel could go south really quickly. Let's not be summoning things, people. All right, let's not. Okay, but so someone did. This is Yog-Sothoth. So again, we go back to Yog-Sothothery, that being Lovecraft's term for the Cthulhu mythos. So it comes from this Yog-Sothoth. So you can see he has like all these tentacles, and this is like eyes or something. Maybe that's a mouth. And then this is Shub-Niggurath, which is a female goddess, if you can believe it, who has all these, again, tentacles and is this weird kind of formless shape. And then of course we have Cthulhu that everybody knows and loves so well.
Yog-Sothoth, isn't that the goat with 1,000 young? That, or is that another one?
That might be the King in Yellow, I forget. The go with, I don't think it's Yog-Sothoth. I'm not sure. I'll have to double check.
I equate that in my mind with something with 1,000,000 eyes,
Yeah,
but.
yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure. I have to double check. So anyway, I don't know if this Kickstarter ever happened, but probably a lot of cultists funding it. Okay, so then there's a little bit more to the mythos. The outer gods, right? So we have the great old ones, and then now we've got the outer gods. Now the outer gods are the ones that live outside of the earth. Okay, so now we're going far away, and because often they're also outside of the solar system. But they exert influence on the earth. So they have some kind of influence, they're some kind of god, and some of them have actually taken up residence on the earth and are now sort of like great old ones. So that's where Shub-Niggurath is actually one of those. She kind of was an outer god and then came to the earth, so it's kind of nebulous which one she really is. But there are a couple others, so the Nameless Mist and then Trunembra are also mentioned as outer gods. And then the outer gods and other categories of gods were expanded upon by the Lovecraft circle after he died. So this is something where even like this list that I'm showing you here is appears to be pretty short. If you go online and you look at like the Lovecraft wiki, for example, I mean there must be hundreds of gods at this point, and it's all because the Lovecraft circle has just expanded upon it infinitely. And now like in the Lovecraft, in the Cthulhu mythos, now it's like, oh, there was a war between these gods. Lovecraft never specifically said that, but it's been expanded upon so that now it's like, yeah, there's this war, and that's how some of them came to Earth, and then others are still outside the solar system. It's become much more complex than it ever was, which Lovecraft was actually fine with. He was actually totally fine with that. Some authors don't like that. They don't want people touching their stuff, which I respect. I totally get that. Lovecraft was not bothered by that at all. He thought it was fine. So you have these outer gods. So then this is also another interpretation of Shub-Niggurath. So again, this is some kind of tentacle beastie, right? Tentacle beastie. I'm gonna call her that. So yeah. There are also some alien influences as well. So we have the gods, right? So the gods are doing their thing, exerting influence upon the earth. But then now we've got aliens. Aliens. How did we get to aliens? Here we are. Yeah, so he is these aliens called the Migo. And the Migo are these weird winged aliens that come from a planet called Yuggoth, which is supposedly on the edge of the solar system near the Kuiper Belt. I think that's actually something that was added on from the Lovecraft circle. They can fly through space, which I find interesting that Lovecraft said they could fly through space, because keep in mind that he died in 1937, and he's talking about them being able to fly through space. I mean, that is very unusual, right? They can fly through space, they're about 5 feet in height, they're covered in antennae all over their head, and then they have claws for hands. I have an artist rendering that I will show you in a moment. You're welcome.
I was looking for that.
Good, artist rendering. And then also we have the Elder Things. So this is another race of aliens. And so the reason why the Elder Things came to Earth was actually to colonize it about, a billion years ago. They're over 6 feet tall, and they have wings, and they have these weird starfish appendages on each end, and they multiply using spores. This is a very, right? But again, it's impressive that he was writing this in the 20s and the 30s. I mean, it's really unusual, I think. And just to kind of talk a little bit about some of the expansion upon this. So in the Dreams of the Witch House, there's a character that gets sent through a dimensional portal to a planet that's occupied by elder things. I think that's really remarkable that he had this concept for a dimensional portal. Like he was already thinking of stargates and stuff, like in the 20s, right? And they had some kind of war against the Cthulhu, which were like the children of Cthulhu, and that's been expanded upon as well by the Lovecraft circle. I find that fascinating. So we have like 2 different alien races that have become sort of like puppets of the gods. They're being sent to do something upon the earth. And apparently guy gets sent through a dimensional portal. I mean, really unusual for the time. So I have Amigo, that's Amigo right there, not Amigo, Amigo. Sorry, not Amigo, he's not my Amigo.
There's a meme about that.
Yeah, yeah. I believe it. And then there's an elder thing, so you can see kind of the, he's got like these weird eyes, and there's like some appendages and wings, and isn't this weird? Weird. I mean, like really weird for the time. Yeah. So the Migo and the elder things are gonna kind of pop up sparingly in the stories. He never goes like full bore into sci-fi because it's just not his bread and butter. But it would be interesting to me to see like what he could have done with science fiction. Like if he had just really hacked on science fiction, if he would have done better. Maybe if he would have made more money. Who knows? Did you say sea monkey? That's fair. That's fair. Yeah. So, like I mentioned, I've already touched on a couple of these things so far. Just talked about the mythos and Yog-Sothothery. Lovecraft never really specifically like went into one story, like, oh, I'm going to outline my mythos and this is how it all works. Like he never did that. He would just kind of shake a little bit out across each of his stories. Some of my favorite ones that if you want to just do like Cthulhu mythos, I would really recommend the Dunwich Horror, At the Mountains of Madness, Call of Cthulhu, Dagon, and the Whisperer in Darkness. There's a lot more than that, but those are the ones that I would really recommend. I already told you about Yog-Sothothery. But yeah, if you're ever interested too, the Lovecraft Circle has added so much to this. I mean, it is like its own genre at this point. It is really like Lovecraftian horror that these authors have just created just a gigantic field out of this. By and large, and so the final sort of chunk of the talk tonight, I'm going to talk about adaptations. By and large, it seems